Welcome to the Hanley Effect, a podcast by the Hanley Foundation designed to educate, change minds, and save lives. Our goal is to inspire you, showcase our innovations, and change the conversation about addiction and mental health. Join us as we unravel stories of resilience, recovery, and hope.
Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to the Hanley Effect. I'm John.
I'm Rachel.
How you doing, Dr. D?
Hi, John. How are you today?
I am pretty lovely. I'm excited. We have, our producer is always saying, whenever there's someone who's both a practitioner and a researcher, I always get excited. And so today we have Dr. Christal Badour, who's with us today.
Wonderful.
She is a psychologist and a researcher who has spent her entire career really learning about how people are impacted by trauma and, more importantly, how people get better.
Yeah, so important.
Dr. Badour, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you both so much for having me.
So we always like to know, we like to ask our guests to tell us, can you tell us and our audience a little about who you are, what you do, and then we'd love to know about the journey. What brought you to where you are today?
Absolutely. So I'm a clinical psychologist and a researcher and professor at the University of Kentucky, where I teach and do research on recovery from trauma. I train therapists, and I also have a separate practice of my own called Science for Survivors, where I see people who are looking for support in recovering from trauma. I do assessments for questions around court cases where issues of trauma may be relevant. And I also really make it my effort to try to do public science education. I think as scientists, we often don't do a great job of actually talking to the people that we're doing the science for. So that's really why I'm here today and doing some of this work. So that's a little bit about me and what I do.
Wonderful.
And what brought you to do this work?
Well, I've actually always really been interested in just understanding how people thrive and live in difficult environments. And back, feels like 100 years ago now, when I was a college student, I was thinking about what am I going to do with my life? I was really interested in sort of human rights issues and psychology, and I wasn't really sure exactly where I wanted to go. But I happened to be living in New Orleans, and I went to college down there during Hurricane Katrina. And it was an incredibly impactful experience for me personally and professionally in terms of really reshaping the way that I saw the world and having an opportunity to get involved in my community in recovery efforts there in both research and outreach into communities. And I knew from right then, that's what I needed to do. I needed to spend my career thinking about how can we better support people when the worst things happen so that they have what they need to thrive. So that's really how I got started. And my journey, I think like all of us, weaves through lots of complicated things to get where we are today. But I had an opportunity when I was training to become a therapist and researcher to gain a lot of experience working with survivors of violence, primarily adults, but also an opportunity to work with children and families as well. And really got to see a lot of the ways in which there are great supports, but sometimes they don't get to the people who need them. And sometimes the systems designed to protect people can fail them. I really didn't like that and wanted to continue to do more work in that space. And so started working with particularly people who may struggle with substance use as well, and then find it difficult to actually get some of the trauma-related supports that they need. I've also done some work with combat veterans. I worked in the Department of Veterans Affairs for a while as well, and so got to see some of the really unique things that people from that community might struggle with. And I've bringing it all home. We've actually here in Kentucky, where I am, we've had a lot of natural disasters recently. And so I've had an opportunity to work with a lot of our rural communities on how to support people better when disasters affect those communities.
It's interesting. You talk about the genesis really being Hurricane Katrina. We had a storm, if you'll recall, just a couple weeks before Katrina here in Florida. Most people didn't hear much about it, but
Mhm.
our family didn't have electricity for almost 4 weeks. Now we had a
Wow.
generator, and so we were able to continue. But as I would hear news stories about Hurricane Katrina, every single time I felt myself being re-traumatized. Will you talk a little bit about that phenomenon for our listeners, what it means to be re-traumatized, and how that is an important consideration in the work you do?
Definitely. Yeah. So, I mean, when you've had something like this, really any traumatic event happen, it really kind of sears in the brain. We're designed to help us. Our brain is designed to help keep us alive, and so when these kinds of things happen, it really focuses in on all the details around it, and it does that so that if there's ever any reminder in the future or a signal that potentially something dangerous like that could happen again, we can prepare ourselves for it. And so that really sets us up for what we consider to be what we often call triggers, which are things that remind us of what happened to us during that time. That can bring back that same feeling. Might be feelings of helplessness or anxiety or just kind of an overwhelm, and might bring you right back to that feeling. And sometimes it really takes people off guard because it could be years after the trauma has happened to someone that they see something on the news or they see something in a movie or a conversation with someone really brings something back for them, and that can be really unsettling. But it's actually our brain's way of making sense of what happened and also protecting us from future danger.
That's such a great frame for it to remind people, that it is actually it's not your brain working against you. It is a survival mechanism. You mentioned, survivors specifically going back, you talked about, working with survivors of violence. And
Hmm.
sometimes, it's hard to get the right resources. And I wonder, can you talk a little bit about public perception, about how people perceive things like domestic violence and intimate partner violence, and what role does public perception play in how people's experience is actually lived out?
Oh, it's so important. I think that violence are things that we don't like to talk about. It affects so many different people, and we have a lot of assumptions about sort of what is a person who's experienced violence that I should feel sympathetic toward, and what is a person perhaps who I might be more likely to ask questions like, "Well, did they do something that maybe put them at greater risk for this?" And in many situations, unfortunately, we find that survivors of violence either really explicitly have said to them out loud, or implicitly they kind of get the message, the communication that what happened to you is your fault. Um, and that's a big, if I could say, like, sort of one thing that I've heard across hundreds of violent survivors who I've worked with is this common message that people hear, things like, particularly when I'm working with sexual assault survivors, a lot of kind of questions that come up about, well, what were you wearing? Or
Yeah.
had you had something to drink before this happened? With domestic violence survivors, a lot of assumptions about, well, why didn't you just leave that situation, without really considering all of the complexities that go into, can you financially leave someone? Do you feel safe to leave? Do you have children or pets or all these other complicating factors? And also, relationships are hard. They're so complicated, and I think people really rush to make snap judgments about, oh, I would do something different in this situation. You can never really be in someone else's shoes to um, be able to confidently make that conclusion. And really, what I try to do in the work that I do is shift that narrative away from asking people, like asking survivors, like, what did you do? And instead, I find it really interesting that in our society, we rarely ask the question about, well, why did actually a perpetrator of violence actually choose to engage in that behavior? That really should be the question that we're asking.
I love that. It's such an important because I think about right now and in our culture now, whether you're turning on the news or you're what you know, sexual violence and predatory behaviors are all over the place, and I wonder how much of that question, how powerful it would be if that question were turned around, right, to support the people who have survived that when things like, just like you were talking about with, you had the hurricane and you would hear about it and you would be traumatized. There's a lot of news today about, files and different things, and without
Yes.
anybody even talking about without regard to anybody's politics, it's all over the place. And are you seeing people have that trigger experience when you've got just in the news things being so ubiquitous?
Definitely. I think we see this, particularly for sexual trauma survivors. Anytime in the news cycle, there are big cases that have come up, and that has been true for many years now. That we're seeing it come up and up in the news media, and the messaging that happens in the news and the responses to these cases can be very triggering for survivors and really difficult, particularly when we hear things that involve blaming of victims, involve releasing of names that should have been protected, um, when there's a perceived lack of accountability for people who are involved in these situations. All of those things can serve as triggers for survivors back to their own experience, but also can serve as barriers for people wanting to come forward themselves, right? If they've seen these highly publicized cases where survivors are not feeling that they're getting justice, well, what's going to happen to me, right? So I think it's a really, really difficult issue for a lot of survivors feeling like it just I can't get away from it, and these other survivors can't either, you know?
Of the things that Hanley does a lot of is work with kids through our prevention programs. Talk a little bit about the impacts on young people when they see violence, or have a parent who is a survivor of some sort of traumatic event or partner violence.
Yeah, it can definitely impact children, and does, and often in ways we don't necessarily recognize because it can look a little bit different in kids than it does in adults. So it's common to see some kids go more the internal route, where they might feel more nervous or more withdrawn. You might see it affecting their mood, or whether they're excited. Really young kids, whether they're interested in playing or engaging with other people. And you might see it more to on the external side. So with some kids and adolescents as well, we see that the way that they cope with these situations is they might start to act out, or become more argumentative, or as kids become older, we might start to see them coping with things like substance use or aggression toward others. And we also see that kids are learning a lot about relationships and how relationships function, and messages around how it's safe to communicate with partners and with other people in their lives. And so those messages are really important, right? As they think about how they're going to navigate their own relationships as they're growing up. It's important that there are supports in place for children who are in homes where domestic violence has occurred. That they see good models, and that their caregivers are getting the support that they need as well, so that they can support um, those children to navigate the challenges that they may be facing as well.
It's interesting that difference between how, how children experience it and manifest that and adults do. Uh, Thinking about families, What would if families are wanting to be supportive of someone who they love who's experienced a traumatic event, whether it's an adult or a child, what would you say to families that want to know how they can help support a loved one who is experiencing the symptoms from some acute trauma?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I think it's really important to know that um, m- many people and families are really, really well intentioned and really want to support their loved ones, but don't necessarily feel like they know how, and that can be a really difficult thing to navigate. And so, some people, because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing, might not say anything at all. And that can really communicate a message as well, right? It might communicate that, like, I'm not a safe person to talk with, or this isn't a safe topic, those kinds of things. And so what I really encourage people to do is to think about how to best approach these conversations, and to let young people, but other people in your family as well, really know that I'm here for you if you'd like to talk about this. And I think we see some different patterns from loved ones. A lot of times, loved ones want to kind of jump in and fix the problem. They get into kind of problem solving mode, right? Like, here's what you should do. Um, and they might even have their, they're going to have their own strong reactions. Oftentimes they might get angry for their loved one. Let me jump in and fix this
Right.
for you. Or they might feel very sad and overwhelmed, to the point where the person who's experienced trauma finds they're having to comfort their loved one who's learning about these things. So I often talk with people about, you should have your own opportunity to feel those reactions of learning that someone you love has been hurt. You need that space too, but also that person who's disclosing for the first time, it really needs to be about them in that moment, and giving them that opportunity to see that, you're not too much, and the feelings you're having, they're not too much either. And I might not have all the answers, but I'm here for you in the way that you need. Sometimes people don't need you to solve problems for you. They just need you to be there. They need you to listen and to tell them, that I care about you and I support you. And I've talked to many survivors who, when they get that kind of response, it can be so much more validating sometimes than somebody jumping in to try to solve the problem.
I love that. That's a master class in 15 seconds. I think it really is, it, because it reminds me of the Inside Out, that movie, that Disney movie Inside
Mm,
Out, with all the
so good.
and there's this scene where the elephant guy is having his entire life torn apart, and he's just, I mean, devastated. And the little sprite person, I'm so embarrassed that I don't know any of these people's names, but she's like, "Hey, it's gonna be all right, and then and maybe and I can fix it." And then this other
Yes,
character, that Sadness, just comes along and says, "And you just lost everything. That is so sad. I'm gonna sit here and just be with you." And there is an incredible power. But I think just to reiterate what you said, I don't like to just repeat what people said, but I think it's so important for family members to hear that initial time, man, it's got to be about the person who's experienced it. But if you're a family member and someone you love, a family member or not, if someone who you love and care about has gone through a traumatic event, it's okay to say, like, this has affected me too, and I'm going to find my own help and find my own place to process this. I'm not going to necessarily process it with my loved one who went through this traumatic event, but it does affect family members and loved ones as well, and so them finding a place to process that can be really important, and I really appreciate you pointing that out.
absolutely. This is something that we work with a lot with families, of kids who've experienced abuse. That family members often feel very guilty. They may feel devastated by that experience. And so while we're working with children, we're often also working alongside with the caregivers to help them process what they're going through as well, so they can show up in the best way to support their loved ones.
Right.
So talk about what you think is the best way to you've used the word safety, to be that safe person, and, to just validate what the survivor has gone through.
I think, one of the best things that we can do is make it clear, number one, that I believe you. That's a big thing. They think that a lot of violent survivors in particular, particularly sexual violence survivors, are afraid that people will not. Another thing that people can do is ask that person what they need. Um, Rather than jump in, like I was saying before, rather than jump in to solve the problem. So, would you like to talk about this? And if you don't want to right now, that's okay too. Not necessarily asking for all the details of what happened because someone may not be ready to share that. And in many cases, that's not what it's about, right? It's not to share their story. It's to have that moment of support. And that may be really what they're looking for. So signaling that, like, I'm here for you. And I think a big piece of this too is I'm not just here for you today. I'm going to be here for
Mm,
you a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, because recovery is not a linear thing. And it might be that I'm here for you to go out and distract you if you need support and be away from all this, but it might be I'm here for you to sit on the floor and cry if you need that too. Because it's different at different times for every person, what they really need to feel supported.
I love that.
Love
I'm
that.
going to ask you what you need. One of the things that I always think about myths that we believe that keep us sick or hurting or in pain, and there's a great myth that anybody listening right now. I'll start it and you all can finish it. Time heals
All
all wounds.
wounds.
We've
Yep.
all heard that. Um, and I can see from your own laughter that's it doesn't seem like you believe that. It's
Well,
act
I think I would ask the question, what's healing look like,
yeah.
right?
It's one of those things that what I think it does, that belief that time should magically heal things,
Yes.
so often people will come and, especially they'll come to treatment. Especially if they've been, in active addiction for a long time and numbing for a long time,
Mhm.
and they'll suddenly start to feel things from long, long ago, and they will say, "It's
Yes.
not okay for me to feel this because it happened so long ago." Do
Yes.
you see that experience that of people who are still wounded, but feel like they shouldn't be feeling that wound because some magical amount of time has gone by?
Absolutely. I think this is one of the bigger things I actually hear from people who have been struggling with trauma for a long time. Why can't I just get over this?
Yeah.
Um, and I see it the most from people who've actually done a pretty good job of shoving it down and putting band-aids on it for a long time, right? I think of an example like sometimes people really try to bury themselves in work, right? I've had this really hard thing. I can't really think about it, process it. I have children to care for. I have work to do. I'm going to really throw my life, throw everything into that. And they're really effective at managing it and kind of pushing it down most of the time. It might pop up here or there, particularly as those triggers come up for them. Um, but when I really see it start to come out is actually when people retire. It's a common
Right.
thing where people who've been really busy and have been able to keep themselves distracted from these things for a long time, then they suddenly find themselves with a lot of time on their hands. Or I see it with other big life transitions, like when people have experienced abuse in childhood and then their children come to be the same age that they were, right? Other things that make it just really hard to keep putting the band aid on. Um, and that's a time when we kind of talk about, like, well, why do you think this is coming up for you now? And why do you think it's sticking around? And for many people, it is because um, time alone doesn't heal all wounds. It is a time to actually process and make sense of what happened and fit it into your life. And so, for people who've never really gotten the opportunity to do that, it sometimes doesn't matter how long has passed, those underlying challenges can still continue to come up for them.
we tell people all the time that, if you had a significant physical trauma, just ignoring it will not make it better. Time doesn't heal all wounds. However, time can help bring healing to treated wounds. And so,
Yes.
I think I always think of that picture of, all of us have got wounds to one degree or another. Some of those are really those big traumatic wounds. Some are smaller, but those big wounds, especially, they don't magically heal. And in fact, sometimes they can even get worse over time if we ignore them. So I appreciate that clear picture that it is you're allowed to experience what you're experiencing, and it makes sense whether it feels like it or not. It, I am the bad guy.
Dr. D, you're always the
Always
bad
the bad guy
guy.
because but I know it is like I don't there's a million other things I want to talk about and so appreciate your time. Before I ask you for your last thoughts, if people are listening and they want to know more about the work that you're doing, because you're actually not just I mean, you're kind of wearing all these hats. You are the psychologist and you're actually practicing therapist doing this work, helping people and teaching as a professor and researching how so if people wanted to get to know more about what you're doing or they wanted to understand these processes a little more, how would they find you or find out about your work?
Yeah, they can reach out to me and find me on my website at scienceforsurvivors.com. I'm trying to include a lot of helpful information on there, just information about trauma and trauma recovery. So that would be a great place to start.
Survivor.
Scienceforsurvivors.com.
Scienceforsurvivors.com. Yeah.
All right. And Dr. Badour, we like to always let our guests have the last word. And our audience they keep track of these things and tell me that it's this really wide variety of people from people in mental health to just people having nothing to do with this field, professionals, non-professionals. Thinking about this, what what is one thing that you would like for this broad audience of people to hear from you today?
What I think I would say for people who've experienced trauma in their life and may still be carrying that with you is that trauma is a part of your story. It will always be, it won't go away. But I think the key to that is it's only a part of your story. And there's much more to tell and much more to experience.
I love
Uh,
that. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. I encourage everybody to go to that website, learn more about what Dr. Badour is doing, and about how you can help yourself and others today. Dr. D,
this was
it
wonderful.
was
It
wonderful.
was really great. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. D.
Thank you, Dr. D.
I mean, that's super fun to always say. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in, for listening. We'll see you next time on The Hanley Effect.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for joining us for the Hanley Effect. To learn more about our programs, visit hanleyfoundation.org or call 844-502-4673.